Beatrice always dreamed of a better future. Coming from a small town, she grew up watching her mother struggle to raise her children alone after her father's death. The difficulties were many, but her mother always repeated one thing: "Never give up on your dreams, my daughter. You were born for something greater." With these words echoing in her mind, Beatrice decided to try life in the big city. Her dream was to become a lawyer, defend those who had no voice, and give her mother a decent life. But she soon realized that reality was harsher than she imagined. Arriving in the city was a shock. The rent was expensive, the people were cold, and finding a job seemed impossible. After weeks of knocking on doors, she finally got a job as a waitress at a small diner downtown. It wasn't her dream, but it was a start. The days were tiring. She worked on her feet all the time, dealt with difficult customers, and earned little. But even though she was exhausted, at night she studied alone, dreaming of the day she would be able to get into college. It was on one of those nights at work that her life changed. The diner was full, and a group of drunk young men started bothering her. They made jokes, pulled her arm, and tried to grab her. Fear took over, but before she could react, a firm voice echoed in the room. "Let her go now." Silence took over the place. The tall man in the police uniform looked at the boys with a cold and determined look. They hesitated, but when they saw the gun on the officer's belt, they let go of Beatrice and left, murmuring. She felt her heart race. Relief came along with gratitude. "Thank you. I didn't know what to do," she said, still shaking. The police officer smiled. "No need to thank me. I just did what anyone should do. My name is Miguel." From that day on, Miguel started going to the diner more often. He would always order a coffee and start a conversation. Little by little, their meetings turned into outings, then dinners, until one day, before they knew it, they were in love. Beatrice, who had never had time for love, found refuge in Miguel. He was kind, protective, and made her feel safe. For the first time, she felt like she had someone who really cared about her. After a few months, their relationship became even more serious. Miguel invited her to live with him. His small apartment was simple but cozy. Afraid that it would be too big a step, Beatrice hesitated, but Miguel calmed her down. "You don't have to decide now. I want you to know that I'm here for you, always." And so, little by little, she began to trust. Life finally seemed to be getting back on track. Miguel made plans for the future, saying that one day they would get married, and she began to believe that perhaps her destiny was to be happy with him. But the happiness, as always, didn't last long. The days went by, and Beatrice felt that, for the first time, her life was on the right track. She and Miguel were happy, planning a future together. Even with the financial difficulties, he always said that everything would work out and that one day they would have their own home, a family, and a simple but loving marriage. Every night, when Miguel came home from work, they would have dinner together, talk about their day, and make plans. He made her feel safe, protected, as if nothing in the world could hurt her. But happiness always comes with challenges. One day, Miguel came home more serious than usual. "Beatrice, I need to tell you something." Her heart raced. "What is it?" He sighed and held her hands. "I'm going to have to travel for work for a few months. It's an important mission, and I can't refuse." The news hit her like a bucket of cold water. They had never been apart for so long. Beatrice tried to hold back her tears, but she couldn't. "When are you coming back?" "I'm not sure, but I promise I will come back, and when I do, we'll do everything our way. We'll get married and build our life." She smiled through her tears. "Then I'll wait for you, but please be careful. Always." The next morning, Beatrice accompanied him to the bus stop where the barracks was waiting. The last look they exchanged was full of silent promises. He smiled, trying to calm her down, but in her eyes there was only anxiety and fear. The days without Miguel were difficult. Beatrice tried to distract herself with work, but the longing was a weight on her chest. At first, he called whenever he could. The calls were quick, but full of affection. "How are you, my girl? I miss you." "And you?" "Dying to hug you. But that will end soon, I promise." But over time, the calls became more rare. She knew he was on a difficult mission, but she couldn't help but feel anguished. Then, one day, the call simply stopped. Beatrice waited for days, weeks, but the phone didn't ring anymore. The silence was unbearable, and she didn't know that the storm was brewing. Just beginning. The days without hearing from Miguel were becoming unbearable. Beatrice tried to convince herself that he was fine, just busy with the mission. But deep down, anguish was growing inside her. The nights were lonely. She would lie hugging her pillow, looking at her cell phone, waiting for a call, a message, anything. But the silence continued. In an attempt to distract herself, Beatrice began to dedicate herself even more to work. However, one day, she began to feel unusually tired. At first, she thought it was just stress and anxiety. But as the days went by, other symptoms appeared: dizziness, morning sickness, and a strange sensation in her body. It was only when she fainted in the middle of her shift that she realized something was wrong. "Beatrice, are you okay?" her colleague asked, worried. "I am. I just need some air." But she knew it wasn't just tiredness. That afternoon, she decided to go to the hospital. After a series of tests, she sat in the office chair, waiting for the results. When the doctor came in with a smile on her face, Beatrice felt her heart race. "Congratulations, dear. You're pregnant." Time seemed to stop. Pregnant. She blinked a few times, as if she had misunderstood. "Pregnant? Are you sure?" "Yes. From what I see in the tests, you're approximately 7 weeks along." Beatrice felt a mix of emotions: joy, fear, anxiety. Her heart beat faster. The first thing she thought of was Miguel. Would he be happy? Did he want a child? The doctor noticed her hesitation and tried to calm her down. "You're healthy, and I'm sure everything will be fine. Your baby already has a strong little heartbeat." Beatrice left the office dazed. She held the test results with trembling hands. She wanted to call Miguel right then and there and tell him the news, but she remembered that he wasn't answering. What would she do now? The following days were a roller coaster of emotions. At times, she smiled as she imagined holding her baby in her arms. At others, she cried out of fear of facing everything alone. She decided to try calling Miguel one more time. She picked up her cell phone, took a deep breath, and dialed. The call didn't go through. The next day, she tried again, and the day after that. But the message was always the same: "The number you called is out of range." Beatrice started to panic. Where was Miguel? Why wasn't he calling? She needed him now more than ever. But what she didn't know was that the answer to her questions was about to arrive, and it would change her life forever. The days passed, and Beatrice's anguish only grew. She tried to stay calm, but each unanswered call was like a knife in her chest. Miguel would never go so long without giving any news. Something was wrong. Fear began to consume her mind. Had something serious happened? Was Miguel no longer alive? She needed answers. Without waiting any longer, Beatrice decided to go to the barracks where Miguel worked. She took a bus, and her heart was beating fast the whole way. When she arrived, she took a deep breath and got on. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for news about Miguel Souza. He's part of the team that was sent on a mission a few months ago." The soldier at the reception desk stared at her for a moment, then asked her to wait. Minutes later, an officer appeared. "Miss, I'm afraid we don't have good news." Beatrice felt a shiver. "What happened?" The man sighed and looked at her with regret. "Miguel's team went missing in action. We don't have much information, but we know they were ambushed, and there's no sign of them so far." The ground seemed to disappear beneath her feet. Missing? Ambushed? She held onto the chair, feeling the world spin. But he could be alive, right? He could be trapped somewhere. The officer looked away. We hope so. But it's been months, and the more time passes, the chances are slimmer. Beatrice felt the tears roll down her face before she could hold them back. Her Miguel was missing. And you don't do anything? Don't you look for him? We're trying, but it's a delicate situation. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Those words echoed in her mind, as if a simple "I'm sorry" could solve her pain. She staggered out of the barracks, not knowing where to go. All she wanted was to go home, lie down in bed, and pretend this wasn't happening. But when she got to her apartment, she was surprised by the worst blow of all. The door was unlocked. When she entered, she saw a woman standing in the middle of the room. A woman she knew well. Miguel's mother. "What are you doing here?" Beatrice asked, confused. The woman turned to her with a cold, superior look. "That should be my question. You don't belong here." Beatrice's heart raced. "What are you saying?" "This is Miguel's apartment." His mother crossed her arms. "And Miguel isn't here anymore, is he?" Beatrice felt the impact of those words. "He can still be here, come back. Or not. And in the meantime, I want my apartment back." Beatrice's eyes widened. "Your apartment? But Miguel told me that it was his?" The woman laughed humorlessly. "Silly girl. This property has always been mine. Miguel lived here, but he had no right to anything. And now that he's gone, you have no reason to stay here." The shock was too great. "Are you kicking me out?" "Exactly. And I want you out today." Beatrice felt her anger grow. "You never cared about Miguel. Now you want to show up and take everything that's his?" The woman looked at her with contempt. "What Miguel wanted or didn't want is none of my business. The apartment is mine. And if you don't leave on your own, I can call the police." Beatrice felt her chest tighten. She looked around, seeing all the memories of her and Miguel there. And now, she was being thrown out on the street. Homeless, moneyless, and, worst of all, without Miguel. She had no choice. She grabbed some clothes, packed everything in a suitcase, and left without looking back. As she walked down the stairs, she felt tears fall. What would she do now? Where would she go? Fate was taking everything away from her. But Beatrice didn't know yet that this was just another part of the storm. The biggest battle was yet to come. The door to the building closed behind Beatrice, and she felt a coldness cut through her skin. It wasn't just the night wind, it was emptiness. The emptiness of no longer having a home. She leaned against the wall for a moment, trying to breathe. Her suitcase was heavy, but nothing weighed more than fear. Where would she go now? She thought about going back to her hometown, to her mother's arms. But the ticket was expensive, and she didn't have enough money. Besides, she didn't want to arrive there with a broken heart and no answers about Miguel. She hesitantly picked up her cell phone and called her best friend, Helena. "Helena, I need help." Her friend heard her crying and, without hesitation, offered her shelter. "Come here now. I'll find a way." With the little savings she had left, she took a taxi and went to Helena's house. When she arrived, she was greeted with a tight hug. "What happened?" Helena asked, worried. Beatrice broke down. She told her everything. Miguel's disappearance, his mother's cruelty, the way she was thrown out as if she was worthless. Helena held her hand. "You'll get over it, and I'll help you." But the truth was that Beatrice's time there was limited. Helena shared a small apartment with another roommate, and letting her stay there for too long would be complicated. In the first few days, Beatrice tried to find a better job, but no one wanted to hire a pregnant woman. Every no she heard was a blow to her hopes. Until the worst day of all came. "B, you know I would do anything to help you. But my roommate wants to bring her sister to live here, and I can't afford another rent." Beatrice felt the weight of those words. "Are you asking me to leave?" Helena lowered her head, her eyes filled with guilt. "I'm so sorry. If I could, I would do more for you. But my hands are tied. Beatrice's heart sank. She couldn't even blame her friend. But now, where would she go? That night, she packed her things and left. Homeless, without money, without work. The cold outside was the first blow. The second was loneliness. The third, fear. She spent the night sitting on a park bench, holding her belly and whispering to the baby she hadn't even met yet. Mommy will find a way. Mommy will find a way. But for the first time, she didn't know if that was true. Hunger set in quickly. The money she had was only enough for a cheap snack. She walked aimlessly to the bus station, where she managed to sit for a few hours, trying to sleep. But every noise around her made her wake up scared. She had never been so vulnerable. And then, in the middle of that darkness, she realized something terrible. She was alone, completely alone. But fate wasn't done with her yet. The worst was yet to come. The sun rose, but for Beatrice, the feeling was that the darkness continued. Spending the night at the bus station was terrifying. The cold, the fear, the hunger, everything was a cruel reminder that her life had fallen apart in an instant. She got up from the hard bench and adjusted her bag. She had to keep going. She spent the day walking around the city, trying to find a safe place to stay. She stopped at a few stores, asked about jobs, but always received the same answer. Sorry, but we're not hiring. With each no she received, her heart sank even deeper. She was tired, hungry, and desperate. When night fell, Beatrice realized that she had nowhere to go. She returned to the bus station and found a secluded corner where she could at least rest a little. As she hugged her belly, she whispered softly to the baby, "Hang in there, my love. Mommy will find a way." But deep down, she didn't know how. The next morning, Beatrice decided to go to a social assistance center, hoping to get some support. But while she was waiting for the bus, a man approached her and grabbed her bag with force. She screamed and tried to hold on, but he was stronger. "Thief! Someone help!" The people around her looked, but no one did anything. The man ran, disappearing into the crowd. Beatrice stood still, feeling despair take over. In her bag were her few coins, her ID, and her pregnancy card. Now, she had nothing left. Nothing. She fell to the ground on the sidewalk, unable to get up. The world was spinning around her. For the first time, she felt like she couldn't go on. But even when everything seemed lost, something inside her still said, "Don't give up." Beatrice closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She wasn't going to give up, but fate still had one more blow to deal her. The robbery was the final blow. No money, no documents, nothing. Beatrice sat on the sidewalk, trying to hold back her tears. She had no strength left. People walked past her without looking. Some people glanced at her quickly, but no one stopped to ask if she needed help. It was as if she were invisible. She looked at her belly and whispered, "I promise I'll take care of you." But I just wanted a sign, anything. Hunger was getting worse. Her body ached. She knew she couldn't go on like this. Then the worst pain of all came, a sharp stabbing pain in her belly. Beatrice cringed and put her hands on her belly. Another pain, this time more intense. "No, not now," she whispered, feeling despair growing. She got up with difficulty and started walking down the street. She needed a hospital. But how? Without money, without documents. She went to a public hospital and went to the reception. "Please, I'm pregnant and in a lot of pain. I need help." The receptionist looked her up and down. "Do you have documents?" Beatrice felt a lump in her throat. "They were stolen, but I'm in pain, please." The woman rolled her eyes. "Without documents, I can't register you. But I need care. My baby could be in danger." "I'm so sorry, ma'am. There's nothing I can do." Beatrice held on to the counter, fighting the dizziness. A nurse walked by and looked at the situation with disdain. "If you don't have documents, go have this baby on the street." The phrase echoed in Beatrice's head. Go have this baby on the street. She felt her legs tremble. "Please," she begged, but the nurse simply turned her back. The pain returned even stronger, and Beatrice was thrown out of the hospital. Alone, without help, without a place to go, she walked down the street, holding her belly. Labor had started. What now? How would she give birth without help? It was then that the phone rang. She took the cell phone out of her pocket with trembling hands. It was an unknown number. She answered it with difficulty. "Hello?" On the other end of the line, a voice she never expected to hear again. "Beatrice, my love, it's me, Miguel." The dizziness increased. Her heart raced. And then, before she could say anything, she fainted. The phone fell from Beatrice's hand as everything went dark. Her body gave into exhaustion, pain, and despair. The world spun, and she felt the cold floor against her skin before she lost consciousness completely. On the other end of the line, Miguel shouted, "Beatrice! Beatrice, can you hear me?" But there was no answer. He was alive. After months of being missing, Miguel had finally managed to call. But now, everything indicated that Beatrice was in danger. Beatrice opened her eyes slowly. The lights were bright, and her head was throbbing. The sound of hurried voices and the beeping of machines made her heart race. Was she in a hospital? She tried to speak, but her mouth was dry. Her entire body ached. Her chest tightened as she remembered the last moments before she passed out. "The baby," she whispered. Before she could panic, a nurse appeared. This time, it wasn't the cruel woman who had thrown her out. This nurse had a kind look in her eyes. "You're safe now. Stay calm." Beatrice tried to get up, but the woman gently stopped her. "Where is my baby? Is he okay?" The nurse smiled. "Your son is a warrior, just like you. He was born prematurely, but he is being well cared for." The relief was immediate. Her baby was alive. But how had she ended up there? That was when she heard a familiar sound. "My love." She turned her face, and there he was. Miguel, alive, standing next to the bed, his face marked by suffering, but his eyes shining with emotion. Beatrice felt her heart race. Was this a dream? The tears came before she could stop them. "You are here." Miguel held her hand tightly. "I promised I would come back. I would never leave you alone." She sobbed, feeling all the emotions at once. "I thought I had lost you." Miguel shook his head. "I would never leave you. As soon as I was able to get out, I found out everything that had happened and called you. And when I found out that you were alive, I couldn't help it. I was in danger. I did everything I could to get to you." Beatrice blinked, still trying to understand everything. "But how did you find me?" Miguel took a deep breath. "After you passed out, the phone stayed on. I heard noises in the background, horns. I tried to identify where you could be. I called a commander who helped me, and we managed to track your last location." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. He raced against time to save her. "You saved me." Again. He smiled, moved. "No, my love. You were strong all this time. You saved our son. Now, I'm just going to make sure no one ever hurts you again." Beatrice felt her heart warm. For the first time in months, she felt like everything would be okay. But Miguel still didn't know everything. And when he found out, someone would have to pay for what he did to Beatrice. Beatrice was still trying to process everything. Miguel was alive. Her baby was safe. But the scars of what she had experienced were still fresh. Miguel held her hand tightly. "I swear, I will never let you go through anything like that again." But then his face became more serious. "Tell me everything. What happened while I was away?" Beatrice took a deep breath and, through tears, told every detail. How you were thrown out of the apartment by your mother. How you spent nights on the streets with nowhere to go. How you were robbed and lost your documents. How you were humiliated in the hospital and thrown out, even though you were in labor. With each word, Miguel grew more tense. His eyes shone with anger. She threw you out on the street? Yes. She said the apartment was hers and that I had no right to anything. Miguel took a deep breath, trying to contain his fury. And in the hospital, who was it that treated you like that? Beatrice hesitated. A nurse. She said that without documents I should give birth on the street. Miguel's jaw tightened. This will not go on like this. The settlement the next day, Miguel called one of his contacts at the barracks. With the help of the commander, they went to the hospital management. The nurse who humiliated Beatrice was called to explain herself. When she saw Miguel, she turned pale. I didn't know she was your wife. And would that change anything? Miguel replied coldly. You should help anyone, no matter who they are. The hospital director intervened. That's unacceptable. This nurse will be removed from her job immediately. The woman tried to argue, but Miguel glared at her. If Beatrice or my son had died that night, you would be held accountable for it. But fortunately, they survived. Now you will deal with the consequences of what you did. The woman lowered her head. For the first time, she seemed remorseful. I'm sorry, but Miguel didn't answer. He didn't want an apology. He wanted justice. His mother's true defeat after the hospital. Miguel went to the apartment where he grew up. When he knocked on the door, his mother answered and, upon seeing him, turned pale. Miguel, she murmured, surprised. He crossed his arms. I know what you did. You threw out pregnant Beatrice, threw her out on the street, and didn't even care if your own grandson would survive. The woman tried to defend herself. The apartment was always mine. You never had a right to it. Miguel laughed bitterly. You know what's funny? You fought so hard to keep this apartment, but you forgot one detail. His mother frowned. What? Miguel handed her an envelope. The debts you left in your name. She took the papers and widened her eyes. What? This apartment is full of debts and overdue taxes. You can't pay them. Despair took over the woman. Miguel, please help me. But he just shook his head. You chose this. You chose to abandon me when I was a child, and you chose to abandon Beatrice when she needed you most. Now you're going to deal with the consequences. The woman begged, but Miguel didn't give in. She lost the apartment. Later, when she told Beatrice everything, she just sighed. What now? What will happen to her? Miguel crossed his arms. She can fend for herself. Like she told you, no one has an obligation to help. Beatrice was silent for a moment. Then she took Miguel's hand. I know she was cruel, but holding a grudge will only weigh you down. He took a deep breath. You're better than me, you know. Beatrice smiled. I just want to live in peace. Without fear, without hate. Only with love. Miguel hugged her tightly. So, that's how it's going to be. They had been through hell. But now it was time to start over. That night, as Beatrice held her son in her arms, Miguel knelt beside her. I almost lost you. Now, I never want to leave you again. He opened a small box. Will you marry me, Beatrice? The tears fell before she could answer. Yes. The past was hard. But the future? The future was theirs. The first rays of sunlight came through the window, illuminating the small hospital room. Beatrice opened her eyes slowly, and, for a moment, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. She was safe. Her son was safe. And Miguel was there. She looked at the crib next to the bed and smiled when she saw the baby sleeping peacefully. Samuel. That was the name they had chosen for him. A strong name, full of meaning. Miguel came over, sat down next to her on the bed, and held her hand. Are you okay, my love? Beatrice smiled. I am. For the first time in a long time. I really am. He kissed her forehead. Then let's go home. Our home. A new life far from the past. A few days later, Beatrice and Samuel finally left the hospital. Miguel had found a new place to live, far from everything that had hurt them. Far from his mother. Far from the streets. Far from the suffering. The apartment was simple but cozy. When Beatrice walked in, She felt her eyes fill with tears. Is this really real? Miguel smiled. It is, and this will be our home, our new life. Beatriz looked around, feeling a wave of gratitude. Everything she had lost was restored. She placed Samuel in the crib and turned to Miguel. I still can't believe all this happened. He hugged her, and it will never happen again. Now I'll take care of you. The most beautiful wedding in the world. A few weeks later, Beatriz and Miguel finally got married. It wasn't a luxurious wedding. There was no expensive dress, no party in a fancy hall. But it was the most beautiful wedding in the world. They exchanged vows in the small church in the neighborhood, with a few friends and Beatriz's mother present. Samuel was in his grandmother's arms as the two said, "I do," to each other. "You are my home, Miguel," Beatriz said, her eyes shining. "And you are my home," Miguel replied, holding her hand affectionately. At that moment, everything they had been through seemed like a distant nightmare. Now, only the future mattered. Over time, Miguel got a good job working in security vehicle maintenance. Beatriz, on the other hand, slowly resumed her dream of studying. She still wanted to be a lawyer one day, but for now his priority was Samuel, and that was enough. As for Miguel's mother, well, she had lost everything. She tried to ask for help, but Miguel decided he would no longer carry the burden of her mistakes. Now, he had a new family to care for, and for the first time in their lives, they were truly happy.